This is a review video for the midterm for PHR 236, Health Issues in Education. I'm going to go through the study guide and kind of talk through the points that I'm kind of looking for, if it was a potential essay question, or sometimes I may actually go back to the PowerPoints as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you here. And the first thing that it talks about on the study guide is explaining how the whole school, whole community, whole child model actually works with the whole child initiative. You're clearly not going to be able to draw the models on the online exam. However, think about how the 10 different components of the WSCC, how you can see different components of the 5 whole child tenets. So for example, you can pick one whole child tenet and talk through how it could be in different parts of the WSCC. The other thing you can talk about is, if you remember, the WSCC model has the whole child tenets at the center of it. So kind of putting it back that perspective that it ultimately goes back to that individual child. And the WSCC should ultimately support those 5 tenets. For drawing the socio-ecological model, know that you cannot draw that on the exam. However, if you do list those 5 layers of the socio-ecological model, make sure that you do tell me that the policy is at that highest level. Why that matters so much is because it indicates that that policy can have such a higher impact to the individual as compared to just making individual changes. So for defining health, you should go back to your initial first lecture slides for that. It gives a really good definition of health, thinking about the fact that it is multiple dimensions and synergistic. Defining community, also go back to those lecture slides. Remember that it can mean lots of different things. It's really those common characteristics or traits. So it doesn't necessarily have to be directly with that geographical location we typically think of. Know what era of health we are in currently. So I'm going to take you back to some of those slides. If you can see on the screen there. So the current era of health that we are in is the period of health promotion, and that started in about the mid-1970s. And really we're talking about that transition of time where infectious disease is not the primary cause of death, and we're really talking about lifestyle behaviors causing death. So thinking about Healthy People 2020, and that a lot of times we're talking about dealing with the environment and healthcare access and alcohol and other drug abuse and health disparities. Describe 5 of the areas of Healthy People 2020. In that case, you just list them. There is a lecture slide on that in the first section. Leading causes of adults, if I remember correctly, I'm going to pull it up. Yep, it's the last slide in chapter 1 as well. And so you have there heart and cardiovascular disease, cancer, unintentional deaths, chronic lung diseases, and stroke. So once again, you see that common factor being potential lifestyle factors. So why does health in the classroom matter? So this is very, very broad, but you should probably go back to your chapter 2 slides for this and thinking about some of those first models we came up with. And thinking about the fact that we know that long-term development and success of children in the academic setting really relies upon their health. And so thinking about some of those broad concepts we've talked about, I know Dr. Ledbetter even talked about how they're interrelated and you can't have one without the other. So really go back to those big concepts we've talked about, linking health and academic achievement. What are some broad ways that teachers are effective in terms of health education? So many of you address this in your whole child reflections paper. So think back to that about role modeling positive behaviors and being that first line of defense for health services and health education, identifying problems early, incorporating health education into existing academic subjects instead of seeing it as a separate component is what's really important there. So the next question, describe what health concepts are relevant and how it impacts academic achievement. So for that particular question, it's worded a little funny, but one thing I would like you to keep in mind is I'm going to ask you to focus on your age level that you're talking about teaching. So if you are a K-5, choose that school aged and just focus on that. So give me one health concept that's relevant to your age group and how it impacts academic achievement. So let's take hunger for an example. It can go for any of those. How would being hungry or being food insecure and not having enough access to food impact academic achievement? Explain the connectedness of the family, school, and community, as well as what approaches can be taken to support the whole child. That really goes back to that whole child reflection paper. You may start to see in some of these questions that I'm going back to assignments we've had, lectures we've had, and even guest speakers we've had, and pulling in all those things that you should have learned so far in the course. For this one, it might actually be helpful to look at our school administration, family, and community slides. I can't remember what number that was. Looks like I've got it number 5 on mine. Thinking to the socio-ecological model, thinking about who serves as the school health leader as far as school administration, but then talking about how community and family involvement can actually look in that setting. And there was a particular article that you read, or you should have read, called Supporting the Whole Child, and you can find that under your readings in the lessons, and that one should help you answer that question. So listing out the 5 tenets of the Whole Child Initiative would be really helpful. Describing the evolution from the coordinated school health to the WSCC model. You're going to find that in your second chapter lecture slides. I'm going to go ahead and pull them up here. So you've got that where they separated the healthy school environment into an actual physical environment and then the social and emotional climate. And then the family and community involvement actually split into 2 as well, because realizing those were separate components. Describe some of the approaches that City of Maryville Schools uses to incorporate the coordinated school model in their school. So if you go back to that coordinated school model, which has 8 components, it's the early WSCC, try to think about the different examples that Dr. Ledbetter gave about things that they actually do at Maryville City Schools, and try to see if you see them in any of the components. And if you can name 2 or 3 specific examples of initiatives that they do, and then link it to whichever piece of CSH you're talking about, that would be great. If you don't remember anything from her lecture, think about your school assessments that you might have done, or you can even go to the Maryville City Schools website. They do have a lot of information on the coordinated school health. What are some potential implications of poor nutrition on academic achievement, and how can appropriate nutrition environment and services contribute to this? So we're going back to thinking about Karen Hilton's presentation, the director of Blount County Schools Nutrition Services, but also before her presentation, you had a couple readings, one of which being in your textbook about nutrition services as a component of WSCC, as well as there should have been 2 journal articles, one related to family meals and one related to breakfast intake, that might be helpful for you to review in preparation for that question. Name some community resources that may be helpful outlets for your students and families, and why. So there's 2 components there. Students frequently miss that. They list some community resources but don't tell me why. So with this, I'm looking for anything. So we have had multiple community resource members in the classroom, so it's really important to think about maybe who we've had and what they could offer your students. You can even think outside of that. So for example, churches sometimes have that physical activity space. You have the health department that has free vaccinations, free dental, and free health care. You also have the health department that will come in and do smoking cessation and substance abuse programming for free. You have UT Extension a lot of times that will come in and do culinary preparation type classes. So think outside the box, come up with 2 or 3 examples there. Describe the teacher's role with health services. So that's a big one I feel like we've talked about all semester, that the teacher is the first line of defense for the student and is the primary advocate for the student's health. So just going back to those key points that we talked through, I believe it is also maybe chapter 3 slides too that you could go look at if you want some actual pieces of information related to that. What are some ways that physical environment can be changed to better support the student? So I believe that is lesson maybe 6, maybe lesson 6, go back to those slides, but think about the things that we've talked about with physical environment. So this can span from the way the actual classroom is set up to having the school resource officer, to having clean water, clean facilities, adequate lighting. What are some ways that physical activity can be incorporated into all areas of the school? So in this one, you had a note about videos. That was from a previous class, but we've talked through all of these. So thinking through things that can be done in the hallways and on the playgrounds and within the classroom, just a couple of examples. Describe some of the important developmental achievements of emotional health. So I wanted to pull that one specifically up. That one is in the chapter 4 slides, the mental, emotional, and social health. And so that is going to look like this emotional health slide that describes how an emotionally healthy person generally has these traits. So sense of autonomy, ability to accept others' thoughts, ideas, and guidance, that unity of personality. So go back to that slide. And in the same set of slides, you're going to find help with the next question, which is about common manifestations of stress. So that is also another slide here, the manifestations of stress. Know 3 or 4 of those that really resonate with you and try to be familiar with them. And then the last question goes back to our last class activity, the healthy components, or the components of a healthy community. So be able to tell me 2 or 3 and describe them, maybe tell me why they're healthy. I also shared the Kahoot with you. There, I believe, are about 20 multiple choice questions on the Kahoot. So there's not that many on the exam, but I would highly recommend going through those as well as preparing some of these answers, or at least bullet pointing things as you're preparing the study guide. If you have any other questions as you're studying, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to help. And happy studying. Good luck on your midterm.